You may have heard that too much sugar may increase your body fat percentage, and that is, for the most part, accurate. The thing I bet you didn't know is that one of the ways it does this is by dismantling your structural self. Yeah, new fear unlocked. But don't worry too much, because there's a way around it. And that's exactly what we're going to be breaking down today. Let's go. Yo, yo, yo. What is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftingbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic way. Today we are adding another notch on added sugar's belt and exploring how it changes our bone for the worse, making it weaker, more fragile, and straight up less abundant. A happening that has long-lasting and profound impacts not only on present-day health, but as you can imagine, our vitality over time, which ain't cool for longevity school. And we've got a new study with a all-time cast of biological components, including stem cells, mitochondria, NAD+, and sirtuins. I'm not in the TV business, but that would be one hell of a daytime soap. Anyway, we will wrap up this powwow, as always, talking about the best things that you can do to bulletproof your bones and solidify your structural self for the long run. Because if you didn't already know, your bone density is very much the byproduct of your environment, which means your daily habits, routines, and rituals very much influence its vitality, and thus yours. And one thing that doesn't seem to help with either of those is extra added sugar, as its overconsumption, a modern norm in today's ultra-processed world, has been associated with an increasing number of diseases, some notable ones being type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. However, one that is not often talked about is osteoporosis, or an age-related disease of bone deterioration and fragility, a condition that is estimated to affect nearly 20% of the adult population, and being so important that we break it down in detail in this hard-hitting video here. Yeah, you see what I did there? Hard, bone. Okay, we'll cut that. But how exactly this happens is still very much a mystery. That is, until a group of researchers out of Taiwan decided to take a deeper look into the cells responsible for building and maintaining this all-important structural tissue, and how a high sugar environment, again a common norm in modern society, affected them. And notice how I said cells with an S, because the researchers not only looked at osteoblasts, which are the specific cells that create and maintain bone tissue, but also their precursor cell, or the cells that differentiate into them, in this case, mesenchymal stem cells, ultimately seeking to understand the impact that a high glucose environment had on these cells in both young individual humans and young mice. Now, the reason researchers chose young individuals is actually quite interesting, because I know what you're thinking. At first glance, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. You know, with osteoporosis being a age-related disease and all, but once you learn that over 90% of bone mass is typically laid down by early adulthood, and that stem cell function also drifts downwards as the average person accrues chronological years on this beautiful floating rock, younger organisms with very active stem cells happen to be a much better environment to observe relative change in activity. So researchers collected mesenchymal stem cells from both young individuals and young mice and exposed them to a high glucose environment in vitro, meaning outside the body, typically in a petri dish setting. Here they measured mitochondrial activity, markers of bone formation, also known as osteogenesis, and fat cell formation, or adipogenesis, within the cells. They also went a step further, analyzing the levels of NAD+ and SIRT1 activity. These are vital cellular and mitochondrial coenzymes and cofactors that play a big role in osteogenesis, or the development of new bone tissue, in case you forgot. Long story short, when there are not sufficient levels of NAD+, energy production among other cellular processes become dampened, while SIRT1 acts as a key regulating and repair gene throughout the cell. And it is not uncommon to hear both of these being referred to as key longevity pathways within the scientific community. So disruption in their balance is not what we want. But I'm sure, that's not relevant here. You know what? Let's take a look at what happened when these young healthy stem cells got their sugar fix on. I'm sure nothing crazy, right? Not right. Within hours, 8 to be exact, the in vitro, remember, outside the body, high glucose environment decreased both mitochondria activity and osteogenesis in the mesenchymal stem cells. And get this, instead, it dramatically increased adipogenesis, or the creation of fat. Well, that didn't go well. But what exactly was driving all this? None other than the depletion of NAD+ and the reduction in SIRT1 expression. You don't say. All right. But how can we be sure something else wasn't at play here? I mean, we're a complex biological system. Could be a million different things. Well, at this point, researchers decided to take this study back to a live organism, a mouse model where they fed said mice high glucose water for a period of time and observed NAD+ depletion in their mesenchymal stem cells. At this point, they proceeded to feed them a NAD+ precursor, specifically using nicotinamide mononucleotide, NMN, to see what happened. And amazingly, they observed that this supplementation rapidly reversed both mitochondria decline and signs of accelerating mesenchymal stem cell dysfunction within a few days. Pretty damn interesting. However, I must remind you, this was in mice, not humans. And all the research that has been done in humans to date regarding NAD+ precursors, primarily NMN and NR, nicotinamide riboside, the relative impact is still very much inconclusive, indicating that there are some complex factors limiting the uptake of these precursors into their target zone. Either way, this data is still nonetheless super interesting because it displays how a high sugar diet may be impacting young individuals' ability to build and maintain their structural self. I could only hypothesize that this effect would even be more profound, in a bad way, in older individuals where the biological odds are stacked to even a greater extent against them. And since we've stumbled upon the topic of odds, let's see what we may be able to do to sway them towards getting our skeleton vibing like it's Halloween again. And we might as well start with the obvious 900-pound gorilla in the room: taming the consumption of added sugar, aka all sugar that is not wrapped within the confines of real whole foods. We're talking about fruits, veggies, beans, legumes, and unprocessed grains. I would say wild meats too, but they don't have glucose and fructose, but certainly a healthy option. The main offenders here, as you can imagine, are ultra-processed foods, or those heavily manipulated grocery store favorites doused in added sugar and oils to appeal to our innate sweet and savory tooth. And if you want a few examples, just walk down the middle aisles of your local grocery store. So, how do we actually begin to tackle this mountain of an issue? Well, there's a bunch of ways, but one of my favorite tactical tips is slowly transitioning away from them using healthy swaps. To do this, first identify some of the top ultra-processed snacks that you may have a little too much of an obsession with. From here, look up, using the interweb or AI, some healthy do-it-yourself alternatives. It could be a frozen blueberry banana nut butter smoothie bowl, a date with organic almond butter, a simple piece of fruit, or even a savory piece of wild meat. Each swap you do will accelerate the adjustment of your palate, while also putting your cellular and metabolic self in a much better position for efficient operations. And the change will also be reinforced by the simple fact that this way of eating just makes you feel better. Oftentimes by beginning to reverse the years of cellular dysfunction from within. Dysfunction that was likely messing with those mesenchymal stem cells and osteoblasts as well. Oh, and it's worth mentioning that these real whole foods are packed with bone-building micronutrients such as vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, and K2, providing your body with the raw materials it needs to construct, maintain, and rebuild, something that their ultra-processed sugar-riddled counterparts lack. Big time. Moral of the story, nourish up for the sake of your structural self. If interested, we have much more on how to eat for longevity all across the How to Eat playlist, which I'll link in the show notes below. Next, we focus in on the bone itself. And the very best thing that you can probably do for it is stress it out early and stress it out often. Not what you were expecting, was it? Let me explain. Bone is the structure in which muscle tissue, or that stuff that actually facilitates our movement, connects to. Think about it. Our bone doesn't have the ability to move on its own. Movement is a neurological signal from the brain for the muscle to contract. And here's why this is important. This muscle binding creates an extra pulling force on our bone. And the more muscle we have, the more force is pulling against it. And the more this pulling happens, the more our bone needs to adapt. How does it adapt, you ask? Well, by stimulating more osteoblast activity and building stronger bone. So every time you use your muscles, especially in an intentional and methodical way, you strengthen your bone, making exercise and living an active lifestyle pretty damn important for bone health. Just another reason movement is medicine. Also, it's important to remember, to maintain proper muscle mass, you gotta be consuming an adequate amount of protein. Aiming for 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight a day, as discussed here, is ideal. Next, we gotta talk about our Z's, as sleep quality, or lack thereof, is associated with bone health through a number of different mechanisms, including via hormone regulation, inflammation modulation, and overall circadian rhythm alignment, or those natural biological rhythms which govern what happens when within our body. And remember, the peak time for growth hormone secretion is when we're out cold. So if I haven't convinced you yet, from all our other videos to prioritize your Z's, hopefully, this does it. And if not, don't you worry. I'll keep trying. When it's all said and done, the common theme of health and longevity seems to prevail here once again. The theme of owning your health by investing in the foundational components of health and longevity. Eating real, whole, nourishing foods. Moving your body in an intentional, methodical way. Prioritizing high-quality circadian aligned sleep. Spending time in nature, and proactively managing stress, which all of those aforementioned things do. These are the manageable and most powerful tools that we have to shift our internal cellular and metabolic environment to one of efficient operations. And when your biological machinery is put in a position to do its thing, the byproduct of that is you feeling effing awesome. Today and over the long run. When it comes to our body, everything is connected. Figuratively, but literally too. And at the core of this connectivity is your structural self, of course, which you kind of need if you want to be boogieing on the dance floor into your 90s, which I'd say is a pretty damn good goal. If we're not all living in the metaverse, that is, then all bets are off. But hey, you might as well prepare for both.